I've been married to Amanda for 5 years. She's always been the type of woman to light up a room. Charming, quick-witted, and just magnetic. I fell hard for her when we first met. She was everything I thought I wanted. Bold, passionate, and confident. But I'm starting to realize that maybe her charm was more of a red flag than I ever wanted to admit. The first couple of years were great, like honeymoon phase great. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but I always felt we were solid. We'd talk about our future, plan trips, and spend hours just laughing together. I genuinely thought we were each other's person. But about a year ago, something shifted. It's hard to put into words exactly how I noticed it. Little things at first, like Amanda staying late at work more often or being glued to her phone. She'd laugh at messages, and when I asked who she was texting, she'd shrug it off with, "Oh, just Kelly from work." Or, "It's a group chat." I didn't think much of it at the time. I mean, she's a social butterfly. That's who she's always been. Things really started to bother me, though, when she began acting distant. Amanda wasn't as interested in the little traditions we used to share, like our Friday night movie dates or morning coffee talks. She'd brush it off, saying she was tired or stressed. I convinced myself it was a phase, but there was this nagging feeling in my gut that I just couldn't shake. Something wasn't right. And then there was the perfume. One night, when she came home late, she smelled like cologne. Not hers, not mine, someone else's. When I mentioned it, she laughed it off, saying it must have rubbed off on her from a coworker's hug. I wanted to believe her, so I did. But looking back, I think that was the moment the cracks in our marriage truly began to show. The real unraveling started about 3 months ago. Amanda had been more secretive than usual with her phone. She used to leave it lying around, but now it was always face down or glued to her hand. If it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly, her expression unreadable, and then tuck it away like it was a state secret. One night, she fell asleep on the couch after we'd had a pretty uneventful evening. I was cleaning up the dishes when I noticed her phone on the coffee table. It was unlocked. She must have been texting before drifting off. I hesitated. I've never been the kind of guy to snoop, but something inside me screamed to take a look. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone. The first thing I saw was a text from someone named Brian. The preview read, "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again." I felt like my chest had caved in. My vision blurred, and my mind raced to justify what I was seeing. Maybe it was a joke? Maybe it was a friend teasing her about something innocent? I clicked the message thread, hoping, praying, that it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. The messages went back weeks. Brian wasn't just anyone. He was her ex-boyfriend, the guy she used to date before we met. They'd been exchanging flirty texts, sharing inside jokes I didn't understand, and worse, they'd been meeting up. She told me she was working late those nights or hanging out with her friends. I scrolled further, and my stomach dropped when I read a message from her. "I've missed you so much. You've always understood me in a way no one else does." That line hit like a punch to the gut. All the little moments of doubt and suspicion came rushing back. The late nights, the distant behavior, the cologne. It all made sense now. I felt like my world had tilted on its axis. I put the phone back down and stared at her sleeping form. Part of me wanted to wake her up and scream at her, demand answers right then and there. But another part of me felt paralyzed. Like if I confronted her, it would make everything too real. So I just sat there, my thoughts spiraling, until the sun started to rise. When she woke up, she stretched and smiled at me like everything was perfectly normal. It made me sick. I knew the truth, but I had no idea how I was going to handle it. The confrontation happened 2 days later. I needed time to process what I'd found and figure out how I wanted to approach her. Those 48 hours were agony. I could barely look at her without feeling a surge of anger and hurt. She acted like everything was fine, kissing me goodbye in the mornings, asking about my day. Felt like I was living in some twisted alternate reality. That night, as we were sitting in the living room, I finally worked up the nerve. My heart was pounding as I turned to her and said, "Amanda, we need to talk." She immediately looked on edge, like she knew where this was going. "Okay. About what?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. I took a deep breath and stared her right in the eyes. Who is Brian? Her face went pale for a split second before she quickly recovered. What are you talking about? She said, her voice sharp and defensive. I didn't let up. Don't lie to me. I saw the messages on your phone. I know you've been seeing him. She froze for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. Then, in true Amanda fashion, she went on the attack. You went through my phone? Are you serious, Jake? That's such an invasion of privacy. Couldn't believe it. Are you kidding me right now? You're cheating on me, and you're mad that I found out. She crossed her arms and glared at me. I'm not cheating on you. Brian and I are just friends. I don't know what you think you saw, but it's not what you're making it out to be. Her gaslighting was almost impressive. Almost, but I wasn't buying it. So, last night was incredible, is just something you say to friends? You've missed him so much because he understands you? Do you really think I'm that stupid, Amanda? Her expression shifted, and she started crying, loud, dramatic sobs that felt more like a performance than genuine emotion. I can't believe you don't trust me, she wailed. After everything we've been through, you're just going to accuse me of cheating? Her tears might have worked on me in the past, but not this time. Cut the act, I said, my voice cold. Just admit it. You've been lying to me for months. Finally, she dropped the facade. Her tears dried up as quickly as they'd started, and her expression turned icy. Fine, she snapped. Yes, I've been seeing Brian, but it's not what you think. We've been talking, reconnecting. He's someone I can actually talk to, which is more than I can say for you lately. I couldn't believe her audacity. So this is my fault now? You're cheating on me because I'm not entertaining enough for you. She rolled her eyes. You're so dramatic, Jake. It's not cheating. I haven't slept with him. That was the moment I realized how far gone she was. Her definition of loyalty was so warped that she genuinely believed emotional betrayal didn't count. You don't get to decide what counts as cheating, Amanda, I said quietly. You betrayed me. Plain and simple. She didn't respond, just stared at me with this defiant look in her eyes. I could see she wasn't sorry, not really, and that hurt more than anything. After Amanda admitted to reconnecting with Brian, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't think straight. My emotions were like a hurricane. Anger, sadness, disbelief, all hitting me at once. I stormed out of the house that night because I couldn't stand to be near her. I ended up driving aimlessly for hours, my mind replaying everything I just heard. How could she do this to me? We'd built a life together. I'd always thought we were partners, a team, but now it felt like all of that was a lie. When I finally pulled over, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was sitting in the parking lot of the diner where we had our first date. I remember how nervous I'd been that night, fumbling with my words while Amanda effortlessly charmed the entire staff. She'd laughed at my bad jokes, reached across the table to hold my hand, and told me she could see us growing old together. The memory was like a knife to the chest. Was any of it real, or had I just been some placeholder until Brian came back into the picture? I cried that night. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I felt stupid, humiliated, and heartbroken all at once. But mostly I felt betrayed. I kept replaying all the little moments that should have been red flags. The nights she stayed out late, the cologne, the sudden mood swings. I blamed myself for not seeing it sooner, for trusting her blindly. The worst part was that I still loved her. Despite everything, I couldn't just turn my feelings off. She was my wife, the person I'd vowed to stand by through everything. But now, I was questioning if she'd ever truly stood by me. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I'd sit at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, replaying our confrontation in my head. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Not just at her, but at myself. How could I have let this happen? How could I have missed the signs? I felt like a fool for believing in her, for thinking we were untouchable. And yet, there was a small part of me that kept clinging to the hope that we could fix this. I went back home after a few days of avoiding her. She acted like everything was normal, like we hadn't just had the most explosive fight of our marriage. It was infuriating. Every time I looked at her, I wanted to scream, but I also wanted to understand. Why? Why had she done this? The silence between us was deafening. Neither of us wanted to be the first to break it, but the weight of everything hung over us like a storm cloud, and I knew we couldn't avoid it forever. Something had to give. I decided I couldn't live in limbo anymore. The silence was eating me alive, and I needed answers. So one evening, while Amanda was out getting groceries, I did something I never thought I'd do. I decided to dig deeper. I started with her laptop. She wasn't the most tech-savvy person, so her passwords were usually variations of the same thing. It didn't take long to crack it. My hands were trembling as I opened her email, bracing myself for what I might find. And there it was, a string of emails between her and Brian. The tone was playful, flirty, and sometimes downright explicit. But one email in particular stopped me cold. It wasn't from Amanda. It was from Brian. He'd sent it to her the day after our confrontation. "Hey babe, I don't think we should meet at your place anymore. Your husband is catching on, and I don't want him to do something crazy. Maybe we can book that cabin next weekend? I'll handle the details. Love you." The audacity of it made my blood boil. But what really struck me was her response. "You're right. Jake's been acting weird lately. I think he's snooping around. Let's stick to the cabin idea. Can't wait to see you. Love you too." The cabin. They were planning to meet again. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But what caught my eye next was an attachment in one of the earlier emails. Clicked it and my jaw hit the floor. It was a series of photos. Of them. Together. At a bar, in a car, and even in our own home. One picture showed Brian standing in our living room, holding a glass of wine with a smug grin on his face. The rage that flooded me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. This wasn't just an emotional affair. It was physical, and it was happening right under my nose. But then I noticed something odd in one of the photos. It was a reflection in the mirror behind them. There was a third person in the shot, blurred but clearly there. It was a woman I didn't recognize, holding her phone up as if she were taking the picture. Who was she? I scrolled through the emails, searching for clues, and finally found her name mentioned in one of the threads. Cassie. Amanda had written to Brian. "Cassie's getting too involved. I don't know if I can trust her to keep quiet." Cassie. Who the hell was Cassie? And why was she involved in this mess? It didn't take long to find out. A quick social media search revealed that Cassie was Brian's ex-girlfriend. She'd posted some cryptic statuses recently, hinting at betrayals and being dragged into drama. I had no idea what her role in all this was, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just an affair. There were layers to this situation I hadn't even begun to uncover. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to piece it all together. Amanda wasn't just lying to me. She was tangled up in something far messier than I'd imagined. And I realized then that if I wanted the truth, I'd have to go deeper. This wasn't just about Amanda and Brian anymore. It was about Cassie, the lies, and whatever secrets they were all hiding. The revelation about Cassie rattled me. I couldn't let this sit any longer. I needed answers, and I knew Amanda wouldn't give them willingly. So I decided to go straight to the source. Cassie. I messaged her on social media, keeping it simple.
Cassia.
My name's Jake. I think you know my wife, Amanda, and her friend Brian. I found some things that concern me, and I think you might be able to help me understand what's going on. I didn't expect her to respond, but to my surprise, she replied almost immediately. "So you're Amanda's husband. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Yeah, we need to talk." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop the next day. I didn't tell Amanda where I was going. She asked why I seemed so distracted, and I just shrugged it off, saying I had a lot on my mind. She didn't press further, which only fueled my anger. When I walked into the coffee shop, Cassie was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her arms crossed and a grim expression on her face. She was striking, with sharp features and an intensity in her eyes that made it clear she wasn't one to be trifled with. "Jake," she said as I approached. "I was wondering when you'd show up." I sat down, unsure of how to start. Thankfully, Cassie didn't wait for me to find the words. Look, she began. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Brian is a piece of shit, and your wife? She's no better. They've been sneaking around for months, and I'm sick of being dragged into it. Her bluntness caught me off guard. Dragged into it? What do you mean? Cassie sighed and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her photos before sliding it across the table. There were more pictures of Amanda and Brian, ones I hadn't seen before, but there was something different about these. In every shot, Cassie was present, standing slightly apart from them, her expression strained. They dragged me along to some of their meetups, she explained. Brian said it was to keep things casual, like they were just hanging out with friends. But it was bullshit. I think he just wanted to make sure I didn't spill the beans. I frowned. Why would he care about that? Cassie hesitated, then dropped the bombshell. Because I know about his other side gig. And so does Amanda. My stomach twisted. What other side gig? She leaned in, her voice low. Brian's not just cheating with your wife. He's running a little side hustle selling. Let's call them party favors. It took me a second to process what she meant. Drugs. Brian was dealing drugs. And somehow Amanda was involved in all of this. Are you telling me my wife is... I couldn't even finish the sentence. I don't think she's dealing, Cassie said quickly. But she knows about it. She's been covering for him, letting him use your house as a meeting spot when you're not around. She's deeper in this than you think. My head was spinning. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was something darker, more dangerous. And Amanda had dragged me into it without my knowledge. Cassie's face softened as she added, Look, Jake, I don't know why Amanda's doing this, but you deserve to know the truth. You deserve better than this mess. I left the coffee shop in a daze, my mind racing. I didn't just have to confront Amanda about her affair anymore. I had to figure out how to untangle myself from whatever this whole operation was before it blew up in my face. When I got home that evening, Amanda was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the storm about to hit her. I walked in, slammed the door, and stood in the living room, staring at her. She looked up, startled. What's with the attitude? She asked, her voice laced with annoyance. I met Cassie today, I said flatly. Her face froze for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a laugh. Cassie? Who's Cassie? Don't play dumb, Amanda, I snapped. She told me everything. About Brian. About the drugs. About you letting him use our house like some sleazy drop-off point. Her jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw real panic in her eyes. But, true to form, Amanda went straight into defense mode. That bitch is lying, she spat. She's been obsessed with Brian ever since they broke up. She's just trying to stir up drama because she's jealous. I can't believe you'd even listen to her. I crossed the room and stood over her, shaking with anger. Don't you dare try to turn this around on her. I saw the photos, Amanda. I saw the emails. I know what's been going on. Stop lying and tell me the truth for once in your life. She jumped up from the couch, her voice rising to match mine. Fine, you want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing Brian. And yes, I knew about his side business. But it's not like I had a choice. That caught me off guard. What the hell do you mean? You didn't have a choice? She threw her hands up, pacing the room. Brian's been in some trouble. Okay? He needed a place to lay low, and I couldn't just turn him away. He said if I helped him, he'd keep things quiet. Keep what quiet? I demanded. Her face flushed, and she hesitated before blurting out. I owe him money, Jake. A lot of money. From before we even met. He loaned it to me when I was in a bad spot and I couldn't pay him back. He said he'd forgive the debt if I helped him out.
Ist daher stunt?
You're telling me this entire mess is because you owe Brian money? And instead of coming to me, your husband, for help, you decided to cheat on me and drag me into his criminal bullshit. It's not like that, she yelled. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I was trying to protect you. Protect me, I barked. Do you even hear yourself? You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and letting a drug dealer use our home. How the hell is that protecting me? She opened her mouth to argue but then fell silent. For the first time, she looked defeated. I didn't know how to fix it, she admitted quietly. I thought I could handle it on my own. Her words felt hollow. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught. I shook my head, my voice cold. You didn't just betray me, Amanda. You put me in danger. I don't know who you've turned into, but it's not the woman I married. She started crying, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. Her tears felt like just another manipulation, another attempt to avoid accountability. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. I'm done, Amanda. I'm calling a lawyer. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. Wait, Jake, no. We can fix this. I'll stop seeing Brian. I'll cut ties with him completely. Just give me one more chance. But I couldn't. There was no trust left to salvage. It's too late for that, I said, walking out of the room. You made your choices, Amanda. Now I'm making mine. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I felt a strange mix of devastation and relief. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Amanda drag me down with her. The days after that confrontation were some of the most surreal of my life. Amanda moved into the guest room and we barely spoke. The house felt like a war zone, cold and tense, with both of us walking on eggshells. I reached out to a divorce lawyer immediately. The lawyer's bluntness was sobering. Amanda's involvement with Brian could complicate things legally, especially if his activities were ever discovered by law enforcement. It wasn't just a matter of ending our marriage. I had to protect myself from any potential fallout. Amanda, on the other hand, tried every tactic in the book to get me to reconsider. One day, she'd be apologetic, swearing she'd make things right. The next, she'd be furious, accusing me of overreacting and blaming me for the breakdown of our marriage. You're throwing everything away over one mistake, she shouted during one particularly heated argument. One mistake, I fired back. Amanda, you've been lying to me for months. You cheated on me, put our home at risk, and dragged me into your mess with Brian. That's not a mistake. It's a series of choices. She stormed off, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, shaking with anger and sadness. Part of me wanted to scream, but another part of me felt numb. Meanwhile, I kept in touch with Cassie. She was surprisingly supportive, sending me information about Brian's activities and advising me on how to protect myself. You need to get ahead of this, she told me during one phone call. Brian doesn't handle rejection well, and if he thinks you're a threat, he might come after you. Her warning became all too real a week later. I came home one evening to find Amanda in the kitchen, her face pale and her hands trembling. Brian knows about the divorce, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. How? I demanded. I don't know, she stammered. But he's pissed. He said if I don't convince you to stop, he'll make things difficult for both of us. My blood ran cold. What does that mean, Amanda? Is he threatening us? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Jake. I didn't think it would go this far. I grabbed my phone and called the lawyer, explaining the situation. They advised me to document everything and consider filing a restraining order. The lawyer also suggested I move out temporarily to put some distance between me and Amanda, and by extension, Brian. Packing my bags that night felt surreal. This was my home, my life, and now I was being driven out of it because of Amanda's choices. She watched silently as I packed, her expression a mix of guilt and helplessness. Before I left, she tried one last time to fix things. Jake, she said, blocking the doorway. Please don't go. I'll tell Brian to back off. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just don't leave me. I looked at her, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. I can't do this anymore, Amanda, I said quietly. You've made your choices. Now I have to make mine. With that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the life I'd once thought was unshakable. After I moved out, things escalated in ways I never imagined. I was staying at a friend's place while sorting out the legalities of the divorce. Amanda kept texting and calling, sometimes begging me to come back, other times accusing me of abandoning her in her time of need. I ignored most of her messages, focusing instead on working with my lawyer to finalize the split and secure a restraining order against Brian. But Brian wasn't going to fade into the background. One evening, as I was leaving work, I noticed a car following me. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but when it turned down every street I did, my stomach sank. I pulled into a gas station, hoping they'd drive past, but the car parked at the far end of the lot. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but I didn't need to. My gut told me it was Brian. I called the police, explaining the situation, but by the time they arrived, the car was gone. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. "Stay out of it, Jake. You don't want to make this worse for yourself." I showed the message to my lawyer, who confirmed it was enough to file a harassment complaint. They encouraged me to keep a low profile and avoid contact with Amanda or anyone connected to Brian. But Amanda had other plans. A few days later, she showed up unannounced at my friend's place. She was frantic, her makeup smeared, and her hair disheveled. "Jake, I need your help," she pleaded. My friend was about to call the police, but I stepped outside to talk to her, keeping the door open as a precaution. "What do you want, Amanda?" I asked, my patience hanging by a thread. "It's Brian," she said, her voice trembling. "He's losing it. He's saying crazy things, threatening me, and I don't know what to do." Her words should have sparked sympathy, but all I felt was anger. "Why are you telling me this? You brought him into our lives, Amanda. You chose to protect him instead of us." Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I know I messed up, but I didn't think it would get this bad. Please, Jake."
I'm scared.
I sighed, conflicted. Despite everything she'd done, a part of me still felt responsible for her. "Have you told the police?" She shook her head. "He said if I do, he'll hurt me." The weight of her words hit me hard. As much as I hated what Amanda had done, I didn't want her to be in danger. "Go to a shelter," I told her. "Somewhere safe. I'll tell my lawyer what's going on. But Amanda, you can't stay here. I'm not getting dragged back into this." She nodded reluctantly, but before she left, she grabbed my arm. "Jake, I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking, "for everything." I didn't respond. Couldn't. That night I couldn't sleep. My anger at Amanda was still raw, but now it was mixed with fear, for myself and, reluctantly, for her. Brian wasn't just a scorned lover, he was dangerous. And Amanda had tied us both to his sinking ship. The next day, I got a call from Cassie. Her voice was sharp with urgency. "Jake, you need to know something," she said. "Brian's not just mad, he's out for blood. He thinks you're the one who convinced Amanda to turn on him. Be careful." I hung up, my heart pounding. This wasn't just a messy divorce anymore. It was a powder keg, and I had no idea when it would explode. The breaking point came a week later. I was at my friend's place trying to focus on work, when the doorbell rang. My friend answered, and I heard muffled voices before he called out, "Jake, it's for you." I walked to the door only to find 2 police officers standing there. My stomach dropped. "Mr. Reynolds," one of them said, his expression unreadable. "We need to ask you a few questions about Brian Peterson." I felt a wave of panic. "What's going on?" The officer glanced at his partner before replying. "Brian was found dead last night. His body was discovered in a car parked behind a warehouse. We're investigating the circumstances, and your name came up." My knees nearly gave out. "Dead?" I echoed. "What, how?" "We're still determining the cause of death," the officer replied. "But we have reason to believe he had enemies. Your wife mentioned you had a recent falling out with him. Amanda. Of course, she'd try to throw me under the bus." I explained everything to the officers, the affair, the threats, the harassment. I told them about Cassie and the texts, emphasizing that I'd had no contact with Brian beyond Amanda's betrayal. The officers seemed to believe me, but they left me with a warning: stay accessible. We might have more questions. After they left, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. Brian was dead. The man who had caused so much chaos in my life was gone. And yet I didn't feel relief, just dread. Later that evening, Cassie called. "Have you heard?" she asked without preamble. "Yeah," I said. "The cops came by." "What the hell is going on, Cassie?" She hesitated before answering. "I don't know all the details, but word is, Brian got into trouble with some of his business associates. Someone must have decided he was more trouble than he was worth." Her words were a mix of relief and unease. "Does this mean it's over?" I asked. "For Brian, yeah," she said. "But Jake, be careful. If Amanda knows more about his dealings, she could still be in danger. And so could you." I hung up and stared at the wall, my emotions a tangled mess. Brian was gone, but the fallout from his actions wasn't. I still had to finalize the divorce, deal with Amanda, and figure out how to move on from this nightmare. The next day, Amanda called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "I guess you heard about Brian," she said, her voice subdued. "I did," I replied. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think this is a wake-up call. I need to get my life together." Her words didn't stir any sympathy in me. "I hope you figure it out, Amanda. But I can't be part of it anymore." The silence on the other end was heavy. Finally, she said, "I understand."
I'm sorry, Jake.
"For everything." And with that, I hung up. Conclusion. The divorce was finalized a few months later. Amanda moved out of town, and I cut all ties with her. It took a while for the dust to settle, but eventually, I started to rebuild my life. Looking back, I realized I'd ignored so many red flags because I wanted to believe in the woman I married. I wanted to believe in us. But trust, once broken, is almost impossible to repair. If there's one piece of advice I'd give anyone reading this, it's this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. And never, ever let someone else's chaos become your burden. As for me, I'm learning to trust again, myself mostly. It's not easy, but it's a start. Thank you for staying with me. This crazy journey is finally over, and I'm ready for what's next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more interesting stories. And leave a comment with what you would do in this situation. See you in the next videos.